Hey guys, this is Mr. Grice for Algebra Unit 8.5 Notes. Today we're talking about solving quadratic equations by completing the square. Our learning target today is to solve quadratic equations by completing the square. So the first set of directions say to solve the following quadratic equations by using factoring or using inverses if possible. If you want to pause the video and try them on your own, feel free to do that. Okay, for those of you who want the help, let's go through it. So let's take a look at example number 1. We always want to get the x or the quadratic term to be positive. They're on both sides, so I have to move one of them. Let's move the smaller one. So we're going to move the 4x to the other side. So I'm going to subtract 4x squared to both sides. So if I'm moving everything to the left, let's move all this other stuff. I'm going to subtract 5x, and I'm going to subtract the 12. I'm just putting the 12 over there because it doesn't really have anyone to match up with. 5 minus 4 is 1, so we have x squared minus 1x minus 12 equal to 0. Well, now we have to think of numbers that multiply to get to negative 12 and add to get to negative 1. What number is that? Hopefully you're saying 3 and 4. But which one's negative? Well, the 4 has to be negative because it's a negative 1. And since our leading coefficient is 1, we can go straight into the binomial. We can do that shortcut. And from here, we need to solve it. And we end up getting x equals negative 3 and positive 4. Okay, example number 2. How are we going to solve this? Hopefully you're saying, Mr. Grice, we're going to use inverses because we learned anytime there are parentheses, we just solve by inverses. Good job, you're right. Okay, so to solve by inverses, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add 5 to both sides. We get 2 parentheses x plus 1 squared equal to 72. Now the next thing we would do is be to divide both sides by 2, and we get x plus 1 equals, or x plus 1 squared equals 36. Now I can't distribute that square into the parentheses, so what I'm going to do is we're going to take the square root of both sides. When we get the square root of both sides, we get rid of the square. We have x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 36 is 6. To get the 1 on the other side, we have to do 2 equations now. We have to do negative 6 minus 1 and 6 minus 1 to get our 2 answers of x equals negative 7 and positive 5. Woo! 2 for 2. Last one. Well, I don't know how I'm supposed to solve this, so let's start by getting all of our terms on the one side. So I'm going to move the quadratic, the smaller quadratic term, to the other side. Minus 3x, minus 3x. Everything on the left cancels. And we get x squared plus 6x minus 10. Okay, so let's see. Can we solve it by factoring? We're looking for numbers that multiply to get to negative 10 and add to get to 6. I can't think of anything, can you? No. Okay, well, we can't factor it. There's no GCF. Can we solve it with inverses? No, we can't solve it with inverses because there's a linear term. Okay, so we just said that this can't be factored. Or it can't be solved by inverses. But what it can be solved by is completing the square. And that's what we're going to be learning about today. So, solving by completing the square, we are rewriting a quadratic equation into vertex form. Okay? So, what we want to do is keep the quadratic and linear term together and send the constant term to the other side. Like Mr. Grice, that sounds really hard. Well, it's not that bad. Okay? So, first thing we need to get is we need to get all the information on one side. Okay? So we would subtract the x squared to both sides and subtract the 3x. So we have 0 equals, oh, I forgot to subtract the 3x. 0 equals x squared plus 6x minus 10. And if you notice, that's exactly what we had on example number 3. Okay? So I want my constant term on the other side. See how we have ax squared plus bx? We want those two on one side, and I want the negative 10 to be moved. Okay, so if I'm going to move that negative 10, I'm going to add 10 to the other side. And we get 10 equals x squared plus 6x. Okay, so that's our first step. That was step 1. Okay, now I want to add b divided by 2 squared to both sides. This is the part where we're completing the square. Okay, so we're going to do b divided by 2 squared, and I'm going to do that off to the side right here. Okay, so our b term is the 6. So we're taking 6 divided by 2 and squaring it. Well, what's 6 divided by 2? That's 3. And 3 squared gives us 9. Okay? And if you want to do this on your calculator all in one step, it would look like this. 6 in parentheses 6 divided by 2 and then square it. So I'm going to add that to both sides. So we have x squared plus 6x. We have the 10. And this number right here, I'm going to add 9 to the right and add 9 to the left. So there we go. There's step 2. Okay, so on the left side, 10 plus 9 is 19. But on the right side, x squared plus 6x plus 9, we can factor that, guys. That's why we did this. All right? That factored numbers that multiply to get to 9 and add to get to 6. What are those? Yeah, 3 times 3 and 3 plus 3. Okay, that turns to x plus 3 times x plus 3. Now the thing is, we want that to rewrite into vertex form. So what we're really saying there is 19 equals x plus 3 squared. And now we can solve it, so that's the factoring part. And now we're going to solve using SADMAP. Okay, that's our last step. So that means to get rid of the square, I need to take the square root to both sides. And yes, I know this is going to get a little ugly right here. We're taking the square root of 19. So that's 4.3. Looking at the number next to the 5 is an 8. Do we have to round it? Yeah, we got to round it. So we get plus or minus 4.36 equaling to x plus 3. And now to solve it, we have to subtract 3 to both sides. And I'm going to do this part in a separate sheet of paper. So we had, let's see, plus or minus 4.36 equaling to x minus x plus 3, right? So we subtract 3 to both sides, and we have our one equation of negative 4.36 minus 3, and another equation of positive 4.36 minus 3. And that's where we're going to get our two answers, okay? And those two answers end up being, we're saying that x equals negative 7.36 and 1.36. Okay. Now, I know that seems like a lot, guys, but after we do a couple, it gets kind of easy. Okay, it's just a pattern, knowing what the pattern is. Okay, so it says solve the following quadratic equations by using an appropriate method. So, to make sure we can't factor it, we always want to get everything over to the left side. So, well, at least the side where the quadratic term is positive, excuse me. So, we get x squared minus 8x minus 17 equal to 0. I want to see if I can factor it because factoring is super easy. So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to get to negative 17 and add up to get to negative 8. And we can't do that. So then I would check to see if I can solve it by inverse. And we can't solve it by inverse because there is a linear term. So that means we're going to solve it by completing the square. We're going to add 17 to both sides, and we get x squared minus 8x equals 17. Okay, so the next part is when we use our little formula of the opposite of b, or not the opposite of b divided by 2 squared. Let's rewrite that so it actually looks nice. B divided by 2 squared. So our b is negative 8 divided by 2, and we're going to square it. So negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 4, or negative 4 squared, is 16. Okay? So we have x squared minus 8x, and that's where we are adding 16 equal to 17. And then what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So we're adding 16 to both sides. Okay? On the right side, 17 plus 16 is 33. And now on the left side, we need to, factor that. Numbers that add up to, multiply to 16 and add to negative 8. Well, that ends up being x minus 4 times x minus 4. And we want to rewrite that into standard form, or vertex form. And now we're going to solve it. Okay, now we can solve by SADMAP, which means we would square root both sides. We get x minus 4 equals plus or minus whatever the square root of 33 is. So the square root of 33, and we get 5.74. 5 or more raised to score, 4 or less, let it rest. Okay, so we have to add 4 to both sides, and we're doing negative 5.74 plus 4, and then 5.74 plus 4. And that's where we get our two answers of x equals negative 1.74, good, and positive 9.74. Are you guys starting to get a hang of it? So I know there's a lot of more steps to this thing, and if you guys are like, oh, it's too hard, well, there is another way to solve. This is the third way. And the fourth way we're going to learn next week. Okay? All right, so number 2. Let's get everything to one side to see if we can factor it, which means we have to subtract 8 to the other side. Let's make that look like an 8. And we get n squared minus 8n plus 61 equal to 0. So are there any numbers that multiply to 61 and add to negative 8? I can't think of any off the top of my head. So we have to move it to the other side so we can get the n squared and the 8n to one side and the negative 61 on the other. Okay, so now we're going to take the opposite of b. I keep saying the opposite of b. We're not doing quadratic graphs right now, Mr. Grice. We're not trying to find the vertex. Okay, so I have to take b, which is negative 8 divided by 2, and square it. Okay, and that is from step 2 from up above, where it says add b over 2 squared to both sides of the equation. All right, so we have n squared minus 8n, and that's where we're going to add our new number. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4, and negative 4 squared gives us 16. So we're going to add 16 to both sides. Now the right side is negative 61 plus 16 gives us a negative 45. I need to factor what's in the blue. And if you take a look at it, isn't that what we just did over here? And so I know that it's going to change to an x minus 4 squared. So that's why on this one, I'm going to skip a step, because it's the same thing as what we just did. Okay? So the next step would be to take the square root. And you know what? Can I take the square root of a negative number? No. And I'm sorry, I changed that to an x when it should have been an n. So n equals no real solution. Okay? All right. Let's go ahead and flip it over. So Ms. Carranza was nice enough to rewrite the directions on here. We want to make sure to keep the quadratic and linear term together. Okay? And send the constant term to the opposite side. So it's going to look like ax squared plus bx equals c. Add b divided by 2 squared to both sides of the equation. And then we're going to factor the new trinomial, and we're going to write it as a square. So kind of like what we did in example number 2, where we went straight to the square. and then we're going to solve by using inverse operations. Okay? So for number 3, the first thing we got to do is get that 5w to the other side. So I'm going to subtract 5w, subtract 5w, and we get w squared equals minus 16w plus 47 equal to 0. So can we factor that? Are there any numbers that multiply to 47 and add to negative 16? No, there's not. All right, so we have to subtract 47 to both sides, and we get w squared minus 16w equals negative 47. Sweet. So now that we've got that, we can do b divided by 2 squared. There's our b. So I have negative 16 divided by 2 squared. Well, negative 16 divided by 2 is negative 8, and negative 8 squared gives us a positive 64. It's okay. You guys can use your calculators if you want to. So we are going to add 64 to both sides. All right. Now let's go ahead and factor the new trinomial. We have w squared minus 16w plus 64. And numbers that multiply to 64 and add to negative 16, well, that is w minus 8, and it's w minus 8 squared. And the negative 47 plus 64 gives us 17. Okay, and now all we do, now we're at inverses. We take the square root of both sides. We get w minus 8 equals plus or minus the square root of 17, 4.12. And then we add 8 to both sides. And then if you want to write down what we're doing to solve that, we have negative 4.12 plus 8 and 4.12 plus 8. That's how we get those two answers. And what are they? You get 3.18 and 12.12. So remember, those are the solutions. The solutions are where these cross intercept the x-axis. Okay? All right, number 4, let's see if you can set number 4 up. All right, so make sure that your quadratic term is positive. See if you can factor it. And if not, get the constant to the other side. So go ahead and pause the video and good luck. Okay, so there were the first 2 steps. Or not the first 2 steps, but we got everything to one side. We couldn't factor that. We can't do inverse operations right now because there's a linear term. So I subtracted the 83 to the other side. All right, so now I need you to take b divided by 2 squared and then add that to both sides. Okay, so you should have gotten 81 for both of those. On the left-hand side, we're going to combine those two, and we get negative 2 equals, and we need to factor the blue. And that ends up being y minus 9 squared. And now we're going to solve by using the inverses by SADMAP. Take the square root of both sides. Ooh, square rooting a negative, can we do that? Nope. So y equals no real solution. Okay, last one. Number 5. Why don't you guys see if you can do number 5 all on your own? Go ahead and pause the video and good luck. Okay, and there you go. Now, did you notice that right away, I could have, once I got everything to the left, I could have factored it right away. You always want to check that, guys. Don't forget. Now, there is a challenge problem down here. If you want to try it, go ahead and pause the video right now. Okay, and there are the answers. If you need help with that, come see Ms. Carranza or myself because we would love to help you out. Now, your homework is right here, 8.5 practice, and you get to practice completing the square, and then on the bottom, you're going to need to choose which ones you need to do. Are you going to use factoring, inverse operations, or completing the square? Okay, this is Mr. Grice signing off for Algebra Unit 8.5 notes. Thanks for watching.